Welcome to Cannabis Health News Magazine with Jason Lauve. Tonight's guests are Crystal Guess and Rico Colibri of CARE. And now, here's Jason Lauve.
Welcome to Cannabis Health News Magazine. We're here today with Rico Colibri with CARE and Crystal Guess, a big marijuana supporter, who helped launch the women's marijuana movement. Welcome to the studio, you both. Thank you very much for stopping by today. You know, one of the big things that I keep hearing about nowadays are all these amendments that are coming forward in regards to legalizing marijuana or the perception thereof. And so one of the reasons I had asked you both to come in today is to speak about not only Amendment 70, which Rico, you had worked on quite intensely, but also Crystal, I wanted to see if we could get you to talk a bit about 64. And what the impacts are or could be for the community at large, for all of us out there who do use cannabis. I think the bigger question is, let's look a little bit deeper and look at how the specifics are going to affect us in terms of driving, education, safety, law enforcement, whatever it might be. And Rico, I really do want to get into what you created because the amendment that you've drafted, and you've been hard at work on this for quite a while, it covers everything. I mean, you really have looked at all this, the entire spectrum in regards to incarceration, people's safety, how this relates to society. I mean, I can go into the details here, but that's why I have you here. So yeah. welcome both of you. Thank you very much. And so I'll just let you both jump into where do we go from here with all these amendments out there?
I think the real question is what do they do instead of where do we go? And what we try to do with Initiative 70, because we're still an initiative at this point, is address all the shortcomings of the other language and also pull in what we know from our activism for the last 10 years and how patients have been affected, basically because we're having this legal battle right now with John Suthers and all his crony DAs that want to roll back the constitutional Amendment 20 and the intentions of the authors, which was to create a constitutional right and a protection. And now we have all this bad case law, starting with Clendenin, ending with Watkins, and most significantly Boehner, where the premise of the ruling in that appellate court ruling was there was no constitutional right created. There was one dissenting judge, and he said absolutely anything in the Constitution is to create a protection or a right. But the other two judges kind of bought into John Suthers' distortion of Amendment 20, where he uses the MENTEC definition out of California, where in California they have a very strict definition of caregiver and patient. And additionally, Prop 215 is in statute. It's not in the Constitution. And Suthers has done a great job at basically pulling the wool over the eyes of the courts and basically rolling back what we knew to be our rights for about a decade here. So
real quick, for those people who don't know who Jason Boehner is, could you briefly talk about his case? He was a street sweeper in Denver who was fired, and then he followed up with trying to claim unemployment.
Yeah, so essentially he was fired because he had a hot UA. He initially showed his employers his medical marijuana card, and they said, hey, no problem. You know, you've never had an issue with you. You just had this hot UA. We don't have an issue. But then they came back and fired him. So then he tried to get unemployment benefits. And initially he won, and then they appealed to the appellate court. And then the employer won based on citing statute that essentially says that if you use a controlled substance, that you are then not entitled to unemployment benefits. And since marijuana is in the controlled substance at the state level, that he basically lost. And then he tried to argue pro se, unfortunately.
Right.
I have a constitutional right. He didn't have the ability to really clearly articulate that legally, and he lost. So then we went and picked up his case for him. We've spent about $10,000 so far. My organization, CARE, which is the Cannabis Alliance for Regulation and Education, because we understood that we could appeal that decision to the Supreme Court. So right now we're one of the most important cases nationally because we're going to go in front of the Supreme Court. We're still waiting for it to be heard, but we hired an attorney, Andrew Reed of Springer and Steinberg. He's actually a law professor. He's practiced law for about 35 years, and he has an expertise in constitutional and international law. So unlike a lot of the MJ-specific attorneys, He's just a bona fide attorney through and through, and he said without question the appellate court ruling in Boehner was flawed. What we have is some conservative judges. We have some judicial activism going on. Apparently, they don't like to use marijuana in their spare time, so they've ruled against Boehner. So we hope to clear that up and reinstate the constitutional right, because right now we have patients and caregivers being arrested. That was never the intention. And you know, Jason, you've been around just as long as we have, and you had your own case.
That's right. I was raided back in 2008, and my trial back in 2009. You bring up how patients are being treated now. There are a bunch of raids that I've just been informed of recently. Specifically, Chuck, I think it was, on February 10th down in Colorado Springs, was raided by 13 officers. And that was a result of they're visiting him on Christmas Day, asking if they could see his plants. And he asked if they had a warrant. They said no. And he said, well, you can't come in. And they said, we'll be back. And they came back pretty heavy-handedly with 13 armed officers, flash grenades. They ended up hurting a couple of the dogs, singeing them on their tails and the back hindquarters of their body. And then I think some shrapnel from the flash grenade entered one of the dogs as well.
That's terrible.
So, yeah, it's absolutely horrible. And I'm really concerned because there's kids in these areas. In fact, this was a raid that took place, I think it was at 3:30 in the afternoon when school was out. So I almost think that these officers are intentionally putting people at risk at this point.
Well, El Paso County is one of those counties like Larimer County where they've just traditionally been anti-medical marijuana. They've been trying to figure out any way to get around the Constitution. And after, especially the Boehner case, now they feel like it's open season. Even though these prohibitionists never dared move on patients prior because it was assumed there was a constitutional protection. As much as they disliked us, even the Attorney General back then knew that you couldn't directly attack patients the way they're doing now. But what you're speaking of is really a symptom of the drug war and the militarization of the law enforcement. I mean, when they come in, like they're entering Basra in Iraq, flat jackets, automatic assault rifles, hand grenades, helmets. We're talking about someone who has physical disability here, and they're coming in like they're taking down Pablo Escobar.
Right.
And these people are trained to go in, shoot first, ask questions later, and they're coming in with this I'm raiding a crack house mentality when you're really talking about someone who has MS, who has cancer, who might have post-traumatic stress syndrome because they're a veteran, and how would someone react if they have PTSD?
Let alone coming in with a no-knock raid.
Yeah.
What is the response going to be from somebody who is a military veteran, who's afraid for their life?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the feeling I get when I get that pounding on the door, late at night when I used to get that, I should say. So let's get back into the issue at hand here, and how do we fix all of this? How do the specific components of, say, your amendment that you've been working on start to look at the bigger picture here? I know Boehner's case is critical.
Yeah.
That's
what's in front of us right now,
because that's going to affect this whole industry right now.
It's not just about employment. That's unfortunate. It's not just about employment, and unfortunately, too many people believe that if only they accept that marijuana is just as safe as alcohol, then blah blah blah. So as long as people understand it reaches far beyond just employment.
So when you say just employment, what else is out there? There's education. There's family rights. There's the right of our custody of our children.
Yeah. Well, with Boehner specifically, it's anything that requires a license. So you're talking firearms, occupational licenses. It can affect your ability to teach children. It can affect your ability to have a job. It affects your ability to have unemployment benefits if you're fired from your job. And when we say occupational licenses, we mean everything: lawyers, plumbers, everything. And people don't understand that everybody's jobs right now are at risk because of Boehner. And then the other issue in Boehner was the legal grounds for the ruling was essentially vague constitutional language creates absolutely no protections. And when it's vague, they have to read it for its plain meaning, and they can't extrapolate any additional protections unless they're concisely said. And that brings me to my concerns with some of these different initiatives and amendments out there, that if you're not overly precise, the courts aren't going to manifest protections for you that aren't clearly stated in the legal language. And then we have Watkins, which is just as important, which basically established federal preemption. So no matter what passes, federal preemption means they can throw it out. So what we tried to do with Initiative 70 was kind of put in the building blocks for a 9th and 10th Amendment challenge to the commerce laws, because all the drug laws are commerce laws from the federal level.
So interstate commerce.
Yeah, intrastate versus interstate. Much like what's going on in Amsterdam, right? Right now in Amsterdam, there were so many abuses of the narco-tourism that right now you have to be a citizen and you have to join the club, because what they had were people coming from France, Belgium, and Germany loading up on the trains and then going back across these borders. So Amsterdam is a good model of an interstate model where, if you live in Amsterdam and you're a responsible adult, you can go to the coffee shop and you can socially use cannabis in a responsible fashion. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with Initiative 70, but yet we're regulating it like tobacco, and in Amsterdam it's merely tolerated. There's no actual laws that say, hey, go ahead, sell as much marijuana as you possibly can.
Right. Technically, it's still illegal over there.
Correct.
They're just very soft on enforcing the law, if you will.
That's because of the Single Convention Treaty.
Okay.
And that's where the Controlled Substance Act at the federal level in the United States comes from, is the Single Convention Treaty.
And that's 1968, excuse me.
I thought it was 61, and then it was amended.
Yeah. There's 61, then there's I think amended in 68.
And the Controlled Substance Act was 1970.
And then also they added to that in 72, if I'm not mistaken.
For the Controlled Substance Act, that's been updated a few times because of all these designer drugs, just like how we have these bath salts and these, spice and all that.
And that's something.
But let's not forget aloe.
That's something that came up the other day. The bath salts reference is. I asked Christy Lunsford, who was in, talking about topicals, and who knows, maybe that will be in the future if I am recording the show. But that said, we brought up the bath salts conversation, and we made it clear that the bath salts you go buy in a shop that takes care of your health, if you will, are very different than the bath salts that we're talking about in terms of drugs. They just happen to pick up that name somewhere.
What I was curious about is who bought the bath salts and thought, I'm going to smoke this?
Isn't that wild?
Like, how did that happen?
These ideas to try these things. And honestly, I think, and you may hopefully agree with this one. I think this comes back to the drug war, in that as we create more constraints for these drugs like cannabis or alcohol,
salvia divinorum,
or salvia, whatever it might be, mushrooms, so on and so forth, people go to harder, more dangerous substances that they can create in their home. And so if they don't have access to any of these substances, they're just going to go find something else.
Yeah, basically the drug war is created the meth epidemic.
Right.
And because of, when they stop the cocaine supply, then people figure out that, battery acid and Sudafed makes a wonderful treat. And it's an issue. But the other issue of the drug war is we have to address it at the state level the same way that alcohol was repealed.
So what do you see are these potholes? They're not potholes. They're craters that are up in front of us now.
Which amendment? Because we waited last to have the final word. The same way I testify at hearings at the Capitol. We waited last.
I'm hoping that I don't see any potholes or even divots in yours. I mean, I'm pretty sure that what I've read so far, it's pretty rock solid.
It's beautiful.
And I'm going to read through it over and over and over again, like we all should. It is, really is.
It really is.
But so let's look at 64. Let's look at 65. There are a couple initiatives and amendments out there that have some big pitfalls in them.
Yeah.
And the biggest one that I'd like to address is the treating cannabis like alcohol. Now, a lot of people have been very supportive of this. There's been a lot of excitement. They got all the signatures they needed. In fact, I think they got 12,000 more than they needed, if I recall. And that's awesome. This is fantastic. One thing that I've been very curious about is what happens when we start to look at the details of this amendment.
No one does that.
That's
not fun.
Very few people actually do read these things, and that's one of my big issues with Amendment 20, Article 18. Very few people read the amendment that protects patients' medical use for cannabis.
Because anything's better than nothing. That's
it sounds good. I should
Anything's better
support
than
it.
nothing.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, if this is anything that's going to be legalizing marijuana, I'm going to support it, just because these people must have my best interest at heart.
The word marijuana's in it, so you have to support it. But I agree.
The word alcohol's in there too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe we can make some sort of absinthe.
Let's look at that specifically. Let's look at 64 and what are some of the pitfalls that we really should be looking at, and encourage people to pick that document up, get online, and read it.
Well, personally, I was very interested in reading the initiative simply because it's supposed to be regulated like alcohol. Now, as a little background history on myself, for example, when I was living in Washington, D.C., for over 4 years, I ran and operated the largest bartending school in the nation. I've been bartending. I've been in the restaurant industry since I was 17. So I've been in the industry overall for over 14 years. So when it comes to alcohol regulation, and I'm a felon myself. I got convicted for something way back when I was 18 years old, so I've got a felony on my record. And in regards to the alcohol industry, I can be a felon, I can bartend. I can be a felon, I can own a bar. I can be a felon, I can do absolutely just about anything in the alcohol industry. So when I went through the Initiative 30 at the time, now it's 64, literally I think it's Section 3, subparagraph A, B, and C. Those are the only first three provisions that I saw anything remotely close to being regulated like alcohol. And it was basically saying that you have to be carded and you have to show that you're 21. You got to be 21, and you can't serve anybody that's under 21. Those are basically the only three provisions that I saw anything remotely close to alcohol regulation. And again, and Rico and I were talking about this last week, and it totally makes sense. I went to the Hood Lab party where I saw you. Great party, Adam Dunn's place.
Fun.
It's an awesome
Thanks,
place.
Adam.
Yeah, first Friday, it's awesome. And while I was there, just like Rico was saying earlier, I mean, I was going around asking people, when people would be talking about the new initiative coming out, I said, "Did you read it?" Mm-hmm. That's all I had to ask them. Did you read it? And again, and I'm not here to poop on it. It's at the core of it, I believe the intentions were good. They do want to set a legal precedence and a constitutional amendment to legalize cannabis for people, and Colorado will be the first state in the United States where the voters approve that. So that's huge, and I will give them that. That's big. So we will have it in a constitution in a state where marijuana is legal. But again, it's only 1 ounce. But what he and I were talking about earlier, and he's shaking his head because I'm sure
it's not legal.
It's
limited decrim.
Limited decrim. But again, you got to ask yourself, it's going to be regulated like alcohol. Why can't we treat it like alcohol? How many times have we heard of somebody driving down in their car with, I think they can
200 gallons.
200 gallons in their car.
It's 100 gallons per one adult per household, or 200 gallons per the entire household.
So I can be driving around in my car with 100 gallons worth of alcohol in my car.
No. That's home brewing laws.
Home brewing
you
laws?
can drive with 4 semi-trailers to a Latin wedding, and I can say that because I'm Hispanic, and you're fine. But
do you get pulled over and get intent to distribute? Do you become a drug felon as a result?
Of course not.
No,
right.
and with this, unfortunately, people are under the impression that, it clearly states that you can only travel around with 1 ounce.
So what happens if I leave my house with, say, 1 ounce and a quarter? Maybe I grabbed a little too much by accident. My scale doesn't work. I don't have a commercial grade scale.
You, sir, are subject to the Controlled Substance Act, where marijuana stays in place under Amendment 64. And you are a criminal.
Yeah.
So there's an extreme drop off.
Well, 2 ounces is a petty offense. So when you say 1 ounce, 1 quarter, you're fine.
So let's say 2 ounce to a quarter.
Well, then, yeah, you're going to get a possession charge.
Under 64, unfortunately, while it does, quote unquote, legalize 1 ounce of possession, 1.1 ounce to 8 ounces is still a misdemeanor. They didn't change anything. And then 8 ounces and above is still a felony. Nothing changed. So
there's something important about the 8 ounces. Because there's this notion that's being spun that you can produce as much as you want in your basement and keep it, right? Maybe some people have heard that under Amendment 64. Right. Well, under the Controlled Substance Act, the mere possession of 8 ounces or more of marijuana,
that's what I was
constitutes
in my trial,
felony possession with intent to distribute. Okay, that's an F4 felony. That's a very serious felony. And the problem is, under the Controlled Substance Act, the way the law works, it goes off the definitions. The definition of marijuana is any part of the plant, the stem, the leaf, the root mass, anything.
Seeds, right.
Yeah, and if the law enforcement officer really doesn't like you, they can water the plant and put it on a scale. That's happened. When you get a little too lippy about what your rights are, they're, okay, Mr. Attorney, we're watering the plants now. We're going to put it on a scale. It looks like you have 3 pounds.
And they do play those games. I've encountered some of those games myself.
You're a victim of one of those games. They took green trash that wasn't viable or usable and acted like you were a drug dealer.
They were trying to make that count for 36 plants, I think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was looking through it, and I called him up the other day, and I was like, am I reading this right? 1 ounce you can possess and you can possess and consume 1 ounce, which is fine. You won't get a ticket. We're saving $100 ticket. But then again, it says you can grow 6 plants in your basement. And I would imagine that after your first harvest, you have a few pounds in there. What do you do with it? If you need to move to the city, or if you need to move somewhere, if you need to give it, if you have all this weed in your basement that you're allowed to grow, and you want to, and it allows you to give away 1 ounce or less to people 21 and older. So if I have pounds and pounds and pounds of my basement, and I want to get rid of it, so DEA comes into my house, they see a bunch of baggies and all these plants. Again, felony, intent to distribute. Right. I got to give it away 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce, 1 ounce.
What if you're moving from house A to house B, and you have 1 pound? Let's say it'll be tolerated, even though I know it won't. But let's just pretend, for sake of conversation, you're moving from house A to house B, and you have a pound. you would have to invite 16 of your friends to all grab an ounce and move from house A to house B like leafcutter ants, all holding 1 ounce of marijuana.
Can I take 16 trips?
Yeah, you could take 16 trips, you know.
That's going to be a long journey if I'm moving from here down to like Alamosa or something.
Yeah,
it's just concerning. It's just concerning. I mean, I know that they didn't write it to intentionally make it so that we could possess all this pot in our basement. That was not the initial intent. Yeah,
we're getting a little differing opinion.
But
here.
if you read it carefully, it really doesn't. It doesn't give any leeway. It doesn't describe anywhere what you do with that marijuana once you grow it. Once it's in your basement, what do you do with it?
Right.
So if you're holding a party and you get a noise control violation or whatever, and the police come in and they see all this marijuana and you're just giving it away to your friends as just being in a party. Who knows what the police are going to do?
It's going to be a really gray area. It's going to be left to interpretation
It's
based
concerning.
on law enforcement and the judicial process.
Gray areas are wonderful for profit if you're a criminal defense attorney. And I'm a very practical person. And the reason I'm a little more skeptical than Crystal may be is because I actually worked with the proponents before title was set. The funding of the public schools was my idea. I begged them to remove it from the Controlled Substance Act because of all these collateral consequences associated with having 98% of the laws created to enforce the federal prohibition of marijuana still on the books. Right. Because you and I know long-term activists, Amendment 20 has been a bit of a train wreck. And what I see is all the major proponents are criminal defense attorneys. Okay? So making marijuana truly legal, here's an analogy. It's like a cattle farmer promoting being a vegetarian. It could be an ethical suggestion, but it would be a very unprofitable suggestion.
Right.
Okay, so the gray language is what some of these, what I would call MJ ambulance chasers, have been thriving on for a decade. And that's all well and good. I understand they want to generate case law at the dime of the ultimate user, but I find that to be very callous. As an activist, my job is to protect everyone. Right?
Yes.
As some of these attorneys, they're lobbyists. Their job is to protect the interest of the people that pay them. In fact, they're ethically bound by the code for attorneys under Colorado statutes to promote those who pay them. And I'm just a random person that's more concerned about how is this implemented, how does the average person who can't afford an attorney every other 30 days stay out of jail. And that's why we wrote Initiative 70, taking all these things into consideration.
And so if we look at decrim, you kind of called it a decrim law.
Oh, it's absolutely decrim.
The way I see decrim, honestly, in my own perspective, is that it's actually increased revenue for law enforcement. It's allowed them to have more engagement with potential people on the street.
We thought it was like alcohol.
Right. And so it's almost a profiling situation where you're allowing these things to take place. So I'm not a big fan of decrim myself.
I'm not either. It's either we're ready or we're not. And I know they keep saying, well, all adults will be able to use marijuana. I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume every adult that wants to use marijuana is using marijuana right now.
And that's something Crystal brought up in our private conversation, and I'll let you frame that in your own context. But what do you see in terms of access to cannabis on the streets right now? Aside from the medical industry, let's just look at recreational use. Do people have an issue with accessing cannabis on the streets right now?
That's what I said at the party. I said,
right.
We were surrounded by like 10 people. I said, show of hands of anybody in Colorado or anybody that's had any problems getting any cannabis over the last 3 months. Show of hands, anybody.
So it's not about access. This is about something completely different.
It's just, it seems like it's just a rush job to be first. And again, when I read it, and it's just so big and convoluted and complicated. We're talking about a plant that has been dubbed the safest substance known to mankind, but yet it's given more restrictions than even casinos have to do just to apply for a license. You know what I mean? So it is, it's completely.
Again, I'm a little more pragmatic. I don't think it's an accident. I think it's clearly designed vaguely. I think that there's certain. I mean, look, locally, last I checked from the financial records, they raised about $200. Okay, so hundreds of thousands of dollars came from out-of-state sources, from very successful businessmen. I don't think that it's unfair to assume that they want a return on their investment, that the language is designed for out-of-state ownership. I know that because I personally debated people. I have the emails. This isn't a random statement. I said you need to make it intrastate, otherwise the feds are coming. They're not going to allow one of your rich financial backers from New York to co-own one of these businesses and have profits derived from the sale of a controlled Schedule I substance to cross state lines, because then it becomes an interstate commerce issue under the Controlled Substance Act at the federal level, and they will come to Colorado and they will sweep us out like they did in California right after Prop 19 was proposed, right? When did all the super raids happen in California? When Prop 19 was proposed. What happens? They propose Initiative 30, and what happens? All of a sudden, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado is issuing everybody letters. So they are preemptively trying to apply pressure. And the only thing that we can pass for a risk-reward ratio is something that, one, allows us to assert states' rights with intrastate sales like Amsterdam does, and two, clearly protects the end user. The end user should not have to pay an attorney $15,000 because he thought it was like alcohol, yet didn't read the entire statute under Colorado CRS of what alcohol actually means. And these people are taking advantage of the fact that most people don't even read cereal boxes.
This is one of the big issues we have in our country right now is education. The literacy rate in our country right now is below 40% at a fourth grade reading capacity. So it's kind of scary to see where we're at. And you point out some big issues. It's almost like we have to give this information to people in some sort of little cartoon or story form. And just like the government does, maybe it just takes repeating it and they'll believe it.
I'm going to state one more very serious issue. And you know this as a long-term activist, Jason. Medical marijuana patients who are lawfully registered have had their children taken from their home, have been denied custody. There is an exact statute under Colorado law that says if you manufacture any controlled substance, that is child neglect and your children can be removed from your home.
Yes.
Amendment 64 does not address that. So what's going to happen is the enforcement of...
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. What we're talking about is Boehner for the masses. And again, they couldn't have anticipated the Boehner or Watkins ruling, but we're talking every responsible cannabis user under Amendment 64, if it were to pass, will be subject to lose their child, their home, their driver's license, their occupational licenses, their firearms, and would be denied unemployment benefits and other social services based on their use of cannabis, like that 55-year-old medical marijuana patient that was just denied an apartment.
It feels like you just sent me back to early 60s in our country here.
Does that sound like the end of Prohibition?
That's what's being forgotten.
Prohibition are a series of laws that create penalties that prohibit you from using a substance. Right. When I can lose my kid, my car, my job, my house, and they're going to shoot my dog, am I being prohibited from using cannabis, yes or no?
Absolutely.
And yet people will get upset saying that us speaking out against something that concerns us is like that we're stoners against legalization.
Right, and some people are going to say, hey, wait a minute, you're trying to stop or scare people away from something that's going to help us.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Well, and then there's the argument you just want it to be perfect. I don't think asking for us to stop felony arrests is asking for perfection.
What about people saying this is a step in the right direction and we can fix it later?
It's in the Constitution. It doesn't get fixed later. It's enshrined. That's what we're dealing right now. My organization has raised about $60,000. We're the ones fighting this case. You've helped us, Jason, by raising $5,000. There's only a handful of us that are on the front lines talking to the high-caliber attorneys, dealing with the state officials, trying to make sure that the average person doesn't have to worry about it like we are. And so when people tell me we can fix it later, that's clearly a baseless, ignorant statement. That's pie in the sky. They talk about me pie in the sky, or I'm a stoner against legalization. Actually, I'm a stoner for legalization. You're supporting profit prohibition because it's better to profit when there's still prohibition. That's why the cartels have the markup that they have.
California's Attorney General has determined that the Repeal Cannabis Prohibition Act will save hundreds of millions of dollars from our overburdened justice system while creating hundreds of millions in new tax revenues from new sustainable jobs and industries that are friendly to our environment. But we can't do it without your help. We are seeking your donations to get on the ballot. Please go to repealcannabisprohibition.org to learn more about how you can help. It's time to end the war on cannabis and hemp in California. It's time to end the madness. Paid for by Sensible Californians Incorporated.
The law offices of Edson, Mayton, and Matz provide criminal defense, medical marijuana defense, and advice about setting up and running medical marijuana centers, optional premises cultivation operations, and infused product manufacturing businesses throughout Colorado. With offices in Denver and Aspen, we can offer assistance throughout the entire state of Colorado. Give us a call at 303-831-8188. That's 303-831-8188. Or visit us online at warrenedson.com.
Hey, this is Jason from Overgrow the Radio. I encourage you to tune in next when we'll have special guests Chuck Ball, Audrey Hatfield, Elisa Kappelman, and Bob Kraus. We'll be addressing the issue of the Colorado Springs Police Department's use of excessive force against MMJ patients. Please tune in. You can find us on iCannabisRadio.com Thursdays at 8 p.m. Mountain Standard Time.
So now we have a couple of these pitfalls to look forward to, unfortunately, in this. And I definitely want to get back to those. I want to make sure that the public is aware of the specific language.
Can I say one more thing
in this? Yes, you can. Let me just go ahead and just bring up one more thing here. Is what I'd like you to do, if you can, Rico, is now that we've brought up the problems or some of the problems and some of the pitfalls, can you go ahead and start to talk about what you've created with Initiative 70?
Okay.
Because what I really want to do here is keep the light on, if you will. A lot of people keep hearing all this bad news. Oh, my gosh, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. And, Crystal, I appreciate you trying to point out that, you're not slamming this. You're just trying to point these things out so that we're aware of the issues. That said, what are the positives we have to look forward to in your initiative?
Okay, so the one last thing that I want to say, and it actually will segue into what I did, is people need to understand that the legal word shall is the same as may, meaning optional. So when you go back and you read Initiative 70 and you read Amendment 64, take note of the word shall. There's some idea out there that Amendment 64 will legalize hemp, and it actually is optional because they use the word shall.
Well, that's something I've been focusing on myself as well. You're very aware of 1099, phytoremediation bill that I authored. And I did look at the amendment, Amendment 64, specifically in relation to hemp. And what I see in that is they're just asking for structure. It's not even allowing.
Well, they're asking just to talk about it.
Right.
Until 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Right.
So what we did with Initiative 70, we don't use the word shall very much at all. You only use the word
it's in there a couple times, I noticed. And please address that if you could, because I asked Crystal about making sure we see the distinction.
We use the word will, which directs the General Assembly to do something very specific, and then we concisely say it. So when you look at the two side by side, one, you'll see that ours covers about 10 times the ground and half the space, because our initiative is actually half the size. So it was all about technical writing and being very concise and saying, you will do this. And then what we did, because we know the political games, because I helped promulgate rules for 1284, we've been fighting Amendment 20 in these different lawsuits, we took all that experience and we circled the wagons around people's rights. All right? You're going to treat us fairly, and we're going to blockade every escape route you might have to reinforce prohibition. And that's essentially what the bill does. We don't try to define how the licensing from a commerce standpoint will be, because we want that to be in statute.
What a great analogy. Out in the wild, wild west, we've brought the convoy together, and we're circling the wagons.
Yeah.
That's awesome, Rico.
Well, because we don't want these games. We don't want caregivers to be arrested. We don't want responsible adult users to be arrested. We don't want children taken. We don't want you to lose your job. And the only way to do that is to reassert what we thought we had with Amendment 20, which was a constitutional right. So what we do for limited personal use, be it untaxed cultivation of marijuana or just possession, we made it a constitutional right. That way, there's no more of these discussions in court about what was the intent of the authors. If they do go that far, feel free to call me. I'm the author. I'll come in and freak out in the middle of court for you for about 15 minutes. But at the end of the day, so what we first do first thing we do is we repeal all the laws. Whether it's under the criminal code, municipal, or county ordinance, we repeal it all. It's all gone. If it criminalizes cannabis, it's gone. Then what we do is then define personal use. Personal use will be a constitutional right. You will not be fired. You will not lose your kids.
Not just an affirmative defense.
Yeah, it is a constitutional right. Then we go on to define lawful business operation, and in my opinion, we covered everything under the sun, including analytical testing, etc. Then we go on to describe how licensing and regulation occur. We use the tobacco model, because in our estimation, a product that has no value to society kills about 500,000 people in North America annually, and it's been hammered out over decades. If those regulations are good enough for something that basically is a license to kill, it's certainly good enough for something that's a license to heal. And that's why we want to treat cannabis equally. We don't want special laws. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to regulate marijuana like medical marijuana. Marijuana is safer than alcohol. So why would we regulate it like alcohol?
Great point.
The only caveat that we put in there is 21, because we do recognize that 18-year-olds are on school campuses, but we put in a provision for it to be addressed later. You know, if you can die for your country, you should have a right to cannabis. Great. write your local representative about it. So we do have that back door that at a later point we can have that conversation. Then we go on to define basically that it's going to be intrastate. This is for Coloradans. If Coloradans vote this in, Coloradans should benefit, and it should be affordable for the average Coloradan. Anybody in this room that wants to open a cannabis business should be allowed to do so. We don't need any more 1284, cost prohibitive.
Or moratoriums or any of this, right?
Or cameras in your face or any of this other ridiculousness that's basically designed to deter the average person from being involved. So, and then we do use a residency requirement, but we make it 1 year, which is the same as for in-state tuition for community college. We felt that was a fair. What we're trying to stop, and all the old school people in the room know this, is the Green Wave Part 2. We don't need the Green Rush Part 2, where 100 people from Wyoming come here.
Carpetbaggers.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We don't want people coming here to traffic large amounts of cannabis across our state lines. We want it to be like Amsterdam. This will be an oasis. Nobody's stopping you from moving here. If you want to come here, it's affordable. There's different type of licenses. You can just produce. You don't have to have a retail storefront. There will be social use under our language, which is actually prohibited under Amendment 64.
So it sounds like it's encouraging state commerce. Across the board in so many areas.
I think the real estate market would blow up. If Initiative 70 were to pass, you would have, I mean, it'd be like the Oregon Trail again. People would be rushing to come here, to live here, to have those liberties and be protected.
And we already have a beautiful state, great place to
it's an awesome
ski
state.
And run and cycle and swim and just hike the mountains and so on and so forth, or just retire.
Exactly. And that's what we're hoping to do is create a state example that can be a national model, and we actually are promoting our template, the language, to other grassroots activists. And what people need to understand is that, if it's not written by Coloradans, meaning Amendment 64, who do you think it's written to benefit? Anybody that thinks that this is just philanthropy or this is just an act of compassion seriously needs to grow up. We're in America. It's a capitalist country. You need to understand that everything is about the money. And what we're trying to do is spread the money to the average person, because we earmark retail sales tax revenue to benefit public schools, public health care, drug rehabilitation programs, and also, more importantly, prisoner rehabilitation programs.
So how does that contrast with 64 and how it provides $40 million towards bonding?
They can't do that without
Why
voter
is that?
approval.
It's not TABOR compliant.
Okay. So in our state of Colorado, we have the TABOR Amendment, which comes into play.
Yeah. Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, and basically any additional new tax has to be authorized in a vote. So the way that Amendment 64 is designed, that tax revenue would be derived from an excise tax, a 15% cap on marijuana products.
But that hasn't been voted for.
No. So it's a completely different vote, and it may fail. What we did, since we recognized that, is we earmarked retail sales tax revenue because it's already an existing tax. So we don't have to have an additional vote. And then we put in language that it cannot be repealed, that the General Assembly cannot remove the money and put it into some stupid fund that nobody wants to see. If it's going to public schools, it's going to public schools. Deal with it. If it's going to health care, it's going to health care. And more importantly, we want to prevent people from having recidivism by either doing the drug rehabilitation program or helping prisoners when they get out. This idea of punishing people for the rest of their lives is the cornerstone in the drug war.
Right, we're supposed to have served our time once we get out of jail. And so we should get our voting rights back, our rights to employment, financial aid, and the list goes
our
on.
rights to cannabis.
Yeah.
Our rights to cannabis.
And again, this comes back to the drug war complex. This comes back to the drug war complex about how felons are literally being forgotten in this industry. And again, one of the things that concerns me is under Section 1, under subparagraph 4, it says legitimate tax-paying business people and not criminal actors will conduct the sales of marijuana. So as a criminal actor, whether that's a misdemeanor criminal actor or felony criminal actor, whatever it is, under this initiative, it just, and I was told that it's just to prevent the black market people from coming back and doing business. Well, how will you know unless you check? Right. So basically what happens with this is that it continues to allow the same regulations for felons to not work in this industry. It doesn't open the door up to them, and I just don't think that's fair. These people have been branded by the drug war. These people have gotten in trouble for possession of marijuana.
And a lot of those people are really good at what they do.
Absolutely, and now we're kicking out the talent. They can't contribute contribute back to the industry that so unfairly branded them. And one thing that I really like about Initiative 70 is that, instead of treating any kind of violation as a criminal offense, we treat it as a civil penalty. Same thing that we do with alcohol. You know what I mean? Like drunk in public, things like that. Do these people become drug felons? No. And at the end of the day, that is what is being forgotten. That is the most important thing. And as a felon myself, it's I will support anything that will allow me equal opportunity into the workforce, that will allow me equal opportunity. And what I see with Initiative 70, for example, is just that. So it gives equal opportunity to everybody, and it doesn't shut people out just because you're a drug felon.
Can I plug the fundraiser for Boehner?
Please do. That's a really, really important one.
This is great.
And by the way, I want you guys to feel like you can come back anytime and talk about these issues. I know we've touched on just the surface of all of this today.
Yeah.
And we've already gone through, 42 minutes or so, the answer to the universe. And please do plug the Jason Boehner event and how critical that is to all of us in Colorado as patients. But not only patients, it's important to the businesses as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because if no one wants to be a patient, then the MMCs can't be in business, and where we have an issue with the registry declining in numbers. So ultimately, we're having the One Love Boehner fundraiser the 29th of this month. It's going to be, the location is 1920 Blake. This is basically a coalition of different industry groups. It's CARE, CBA, and ACT, CBA being the Cannabis Business Alliance, and ACT being the Association of Cannabis Trades, which Jason is affiliated with. There's going to be a $10 suggested donation at the door. There's going to be a raffle, live music, featuring bands like Whiskey Tango, Bugsy Mogs, and hopefully Nika T. We asked him, he said he was interested, but we got to make sure that he's available because it's he's a pretty busy man.
He is a busy man because he's good at what he does.
Well,
he's awesome.
And here's the thing. Boehner is the law of the land. So everything we talked about today was conjecture. If this passes, if that passes. Right now, the law of the land is the Boehner case and the Watkins case. And if we win the Boehner case, we will go back to pre-1284 protections, if everybody remembers what that was like. So please come out to this event. If you see me, I'll be sure to talk your ear off about Amendment 64 and we could definitely use the money because we're trying to raise around about another 20,000.
Fantastic. So everyone, please show up, and that's at the Hate. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like hater. It's a really unusual name. Hater, come to Hater.
I had to throw that.
Where we love you.
Where we love you. Come for the one love and the hate. Right.
Yeah.
I thought that was really kind of interesting because if you think back to San Francisco in terms of Haight and Ashbury.
Haight and Ashbury. Now you're getting really hippie on me. I'm gonna have to
well,
call
we've got Dennis Perrone coming up in the next couple of weeks here.
On the show?
He'll be on our show on the 30th.
I'd like to get his input on the different sets of language.
He'll also be on Overgrow the Radio with Stickman, and we definitely want to have him on a couple times. Maybe what we can do, I'll call Dennis and ask him, see if we can get a show together with you guys. I'd really like to have his input on all this because, as we all know, he really helped start this movement back with Harvey Milk in the 70s.
I forgot one thing.
Sure.
Under Initiative 70,
we still have some time here.
All sales to medical marijuana patients that are registered would be tax exempt. Because nobody has to pay tax on their medication, so why should medical marijuana patients?
So now we're getting back to the real picture of how we take care of the patients here.
Exactly.
And so you're using this model to essentially assist the patients.
Correct, because they shouldn't be paying tax on their medication. Most of these people are on a fixed income to begin with. They're dying. Many of them are dying of very serious illnesses, and we're over there treating it like it's recreational by taxing them.
Rico, it's amazing to me because you give me chills really in what you've created here because you are addressing not only what's ethically right for somebody, but what's morally right and what's needed,
equal, what's legally equal,
needed in our community to equalize everybody. There's so much prejudice in our world right now about so many things. And to be a medical cannabis user, we all know we're treated as second-class citizens. And
worse.
I can't even comprehend what it's going to feel like to be an equal. I mean, it's interesting because I referred briefly to the end of Prohibition and civil rights and a couple other movements that have taken place in our past, in our history. And I see all those as critical because they've given us tools to do what we're doing today.
And let me point out another thing about the civil rights because that's a great analogy because this is the most pertinent civil and human rights issue, and it's connected to it ties it all together, the drug war. There was a lot of people who didn't like Martin Luther King. There was a lot of people who didn't like Gandhi. And the idea of being popular and also being righteous don't necessarily go hand in hand.
They don't.
And a lot of people will probably be angry about what I'm saying today, but I'm saying it because it's right. No one's paying me. No one has paid me. In fact, we've gone out of our way to pay tens of thousands of dollars to protect everybody. So if you have an issue with what I'm saying, please read the language.
And reach out to us. Get in contact with Rico, Crystal, and myself, or anybody else that may feel comfortable with this conversation.
And
let's get this conversation out there.
Absolutely.
We need to talk.
Absolutely. And if I just might add, just as an ending note for my own sake, is let's just remember what we're fighting here for. That's it. Let's just remember what we're fighting for. Let's not make any selfish votes, which is, I get to smoke pot wherever I want.
Yeah.
Let's make the
Who cares about the
selfless
poor people?
vote. Yeah, let's remember who's really being affected by the drug war. Are we going to support initiatives that stop prohibition, that stop felony arrests, or are we going to support language that continues it?
You bring up a really important issue. We need to look at the bigger picture of what's going on today. There's a lot of things in our world right now that have gone haywire. It could be our food system, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the schools we go to. I could run out of breath talking about this stuff. We all need to come together as a community and look out for each other. The reason this country is here, it's for us as individuals to express our individual rights. It's not for all of us to speak as one message. It's for all of us to allow that message to travel through all of us as our own individual people. So let's make sure that in this conversation that we try and bring those people, the naysayers, let's try and bring those people into our circle. And not necessarily push them away. And
whether we agree or not,
and
let's
let's
have a
not
conversation.
dub people that are speaking out against things like this as stoners against legalization.
Right.
That's not cool. That's I don't know of anybody that really cares more about patient advocacy than this guy. I mean, and you guys.
and yourself,
you too.
Crystal. I mean, and there's actually a couple people in here. It's
Oh,
amazing. The energy's growing. And so, Crystal, Rico, thank you so much for coming in today and contributing what you have to say about Amendment 64. What you've brought to the table with Initiative 70, and also just touching on some of the other things that we need to all be aware of.
Do you have a website?
We do. We
Do you mind